Hello. I have just finished interviewing the founder of a startup that aims to build Tesla of restaurants. What does that mean? Their aim is to build the most efficient, mostly robot-run restaurants and franchise chain that there is. And so here is the founder, Joseph. We're currently in the laboratory where they make the robots. I'll show you a quick preview of what the restaurant itself looks like. It's very cool. Here's a nice hat that shows the brand of the restaurant. It's called Common Room. And in the interview, we discussed some really interesting things, which include lessons from founders we find inspiring, the history of the kind of food and beverage market, and the story of and journey of how this company is coming to fruition. So I'm looking forward to it, and we'll get into it right now. As promised, here's a very brief tour from Joseph.
This is where we built all of the hardware. You can see some prototypes there. Our influencer Eddie Hall operating the robots, turning from the world's strongest man to the world's fastest chef. Dashboards to collect all the data, everything made in London, not even just in Britain, made in London. And then walking forward here, we've got all our AI experiments, all the data dashboards. We've got our one-way mirror where you can stand here and observe everything that's going on. We've got another dashboard here, collecting data of occupancy using computer vision and then seeing when our AI model predicts the occupancy precise enough. And then some other dashboards up there.
And finally, we have the outside itself, which is beautifully designed with robots in place, ready to cook food for whenever you would like. Hello, and thank you for joining me on the London Technology Review, where we sit down with founders, investors, and technologists leading Britain's technology ecosystem. And we try to absorb as much as possible about what it takes to build great technology companies. My guest today is Joseph Chen, the CEO of Kaikaku, a robotics-run restaurant provider. And where I will say, having looked at his kind of background descriptions, I think is one of the most entertaining ones I've ever seen. In terms of building Kaikaku, on LinkedIn he says, the reason behind that is he was traumatized by the amount of potatoes he had to peel in his parents' Chinese restaurant since age 6. Lots of levity there. On top of that, for the prior company that he built, he says, from a joke during a flight to our first dark kitchen 1 week later, i.e. move fast and break things. I think he's very much the embodiment of that. And I thought there were two other kind of good descriptions on the finance side of things, where he worked at a firm called Proterra Investment Partners Asia. He says, my Giga Chad boss won the world's first regulatory lab-grown meat approval for his Portco, and he wins board seats against KKR. What a great encapsulation of kind of being a winner. And then finally, for Titan Wealth Holdings, on a shopping spree for fund managers to reach 40 billion AUM, I aped 2 acquisitions and 1 FCA CIC filing. I'm excited to get into this, Joseph. I have really enjoyed kind of visiting the restaurant that you run as well. And so I think we'll probably start there. What is Kaikaku? What is its origin story, overall vision, and what is the stage you guys are at in bringing that vision to life?
Thanks, Trish. A very, very good intro. Just read all my LinkedIn down. So what does Kaikaku do? Our dream since the beginning, and the reason why we are doing, I call it a star shot, is I grew up in a Chinese restaurant family. And as my description said, my parents forced me to work in the restaurant since the age of 5 or 6. And I absolutely hated it. Not because just the job was shit. Can I say words like that?
Of course, go for it. This is a uncensored zone.
Perfect. But also because nothing has ever changed. All attempts to change the industry have all failed. It took me more than 10 years to convince my own parents to buy a reservation management software for 20 euros a month. And so for me, it was broken. And I told myself, look, Joseph, you have to escape this industry. Please do not touch restaurants ever again. But if you do, you have to go for a startup. That's how everything began. And to me, there are 2 things to Kaikaku, and the product and also the distribution. So the product, what we build is, we say the only way to change things is to build something completely from scratch, fully vertically integrated, just like Tesla had to do with their first Roadster with entirely EV platform. So that's what we're building. The distribution is, in the restaurant industry, it's very hard, or even in that sense, nowadays, it's very hard to sell anything in the form of software as a service or licensing, whatever. Why? Because you can't have enough capacity to target all sorts of small, medium businesses, but also even if you make the sale, you will get maybe 0.1% of the gross revenue or gross merchandise value, GMV. Whereas what we think, and especially in restaurants, the only way to make real innovation venture scale is to do franchising. Now, why is that? Franchising is inherently power loads. The most successful franchises grow like crazy. A recent example is Crumble Cookies. They grew from 0 to 1 billion system revenue in 5 years. Not many software companies can do that. Yet they capture at the minimum 5 to 10% of GMV just with the licensing, just with the brand, excluding any tech support, marketing, etc. So that's our distribution. That's why we set out to do. We literally assembled, I think, the world's best team to do so, from people who've done it before, the former chief development officer of Subway, who opened 40,000 restaurants for Subway. And also the co-founding team includes people like my co-founder Piers, who was UK's youngest McDonald's manager, who dropped out the LSE to join this company as a co-founder. And on the technical front, the product front is we said, okay, if we do full vertical integration, we need to prove very, very capital efficiently that we can drive real ROI in form of, magnificently higher profit margins. And that's what we've proven so far. So we're at a stage where we have a very lean team. We've built an entire restaurant from scratch behind me. We call it the living restaurant laboratory, which does at least twice, 3-4 times the profit margins of any equivalent concept. And the only way it works was we built and connected all the dots together, from the user journeys to the tech map to data analytics, robotics, computer vision, all of that.
Incredible. I really like that kind of term used, magnificent ROI, right? And I think that's kind of like a really kind of high effective bar to kind of hold oneself to, especially when you're going full stack. But the second thing was, you mentioned your colleague who was involved with McDonald's. And I didn't realize this until now, but it seems to be the case for your business model. In the same way that McDonald's was both the kind of IP brand and playbook, right? And then the kind of franchise business, they also have the real estate underneath. I presume because you guys are building such a great kind of technology suite, that technology suite is something that like so central to you guys ends up being rented out as well. Is that correct in some sense? Are there inspirations there?
All right. So that's the pricing power. McDonald's can charge ridiculous prices because they have the power. And if we become the next generation of McDonald's, in a real estate game, it's too late for us to join, but the tech game, that's what we're good at.
Phenomenal. I love that story. And so would love to like dig a bit deeper into what the current product suite is. I love the kind of like, aesthetics on the website and kind of seeing some of it actually in person at the kind of common restaurant. I'm particularly interested in understanding the story behind the world's fastest food assembler. But if you could walk us through, I guess, the product stack and the roadmap on that front, so we can nerd out a bit about that. Would love to kind of hear more about.
Yeah, so we're just around a year old. What we said to focus on is food assembly. It's one of the problems. If you solve it, it's going to make a restaurant extremely efficient. Specifically in our case, we just sell bowls, and a bowl doesn't require much cooking, slice, etc. It's just assembling a lot of ingredients in the shortest amount of time. So that's what we specialize in. And this is our case study, if you will. And we built this robot that costs a few $1,000s to set up an entire rig that can serve 300 to 400 bowls an hour, literally replacing at least 4 or 5 full-time employees, and still be part of them have higher throughput. And that's a hardware part that we built. The only reason the hardware works, though, is it is interconnected with all the other systems. We're not the first one to automate a single step within a restaurant, but I would say we are the first ones. This is why our hardware works within a year, not in a lab, but in a real restaurant. Is everything's interconnected. We iterate super fast. We get all the data we need. We have real customers paying real money, who will file real complaints if things go wrong. And that's the product that we've proven that it works. And that's just the beginning. We just do food assembly now. It took us a year and a small team to do so. The sky's the limit. Assembly is simple, and you can go to, cooking, slicing, all of that. And we do not need to reinvent the wheel there. So we onboarded another very impressive advisor, Dave Green, who was the former chief science officer of Mars, who led Mars's, I think they have $500 million R&D budget to create all sorts of new food processing technologies, but also making sure it's scalable and safe. So that's the dream. We will expand R&D, initially pick up the low-hanging fruits like food assembly, prove the real ROI, and scale up the portfolio as we go.
Fantastic. So for our YouTube listeners, they will probably be able to see this, for podcast listeners, they may not, but there's a very dense dashboard behind you that kind of shows some of the metrics. You used this term living restaurant, and you're talking about the iteration cycles. We'd love it if you could walk us through some of the kind of metrics you're tracking and how the journey you've gone on in kind of figuring out how to go about, I guess, like thinking about that optimization and that kind of like iteration cycle and process, or what some of the trial and error perhaps was, but particularly from a metrics driven perspective.
Yeah, I think you can sum up all the metrics into profit. That's the ultimate metric for us. How we do that, there are lots of things one can test. For example, if we fetch weather data, fetch historical sales data, and we can know, oh, actually in a week's time it's going to be raining. We know if it rains, there's going to be less customers. We can accordingly plan the staff levels. The outcome of that, if you come ever and look at our dashboards, just like any restaurant, revenue is up and down, a little bit unpredictable. But in a normal restaurant, the staff wages are more or less flat, flat during a week and then going down during the weekend. Ours literally mirrors, the correlation is almost like 90% of if revenue is down, our staff levels go down, if revenue is up. And this is predictive staffing. Another very instrumental thing, for example, is, are we successful in nudging the customers? Are we successful in understanding real-time trends? As an example, we had a summer type bowl, and we saw immediately within the last 2 weeks, hey, weather is colder and the sales of those bowls are going down. And immediately we knew, okay, we need to do something. So we launched an autumn version of the bowl. And other things, just like any restaurant or actually retail store, there are profit makers and there are loss leaders. We have a Beast Bowl, that's our biggest profit maker, and we nudge the customers on the kiosks where they order, on the TVs, on the posters. Hey, the Beast Bowl, you should order that because it's good for you, blah, blah, blah. But in reality, for us, we know that will bring the money, that will increase the average order value. And all these small things, intuitive things you can do with data, simply said.
That's fantastic. It reminds you of this kind of idea of Kaizen, right? Just continuous improvement. Tons of tiny experiments in the margin add up to Costco-like business, where even though you're optimizing for efficiency, you end up becoming this really kind of capital efficient machine at the same time. Hearing about those stories is kind of inspiring. If we zoom out a bit, right? Your manifesto on the website says most solutions in this industry work in theory, but fail in practice, leaving restaurants stuck in outdated operational models. And then you say, we prioritize practicality over fanciness. Our innovations must work in real world conditions. Clearly, the lab is a part of that. I'm wondering, what are some of the solutions or innovations that the industry right now, you mentioned that $500 million R&D budget that belongs to Mars. What are some of those innovations or kind of experiments that they get wrong at the moment, and why are they getting that wrong?
Great question. I would say more things are going right than wrong. So I'm very optimistic. However, the one thing, the key learning we realized is you have seen all sorts of automation in the world, in the restaurant space or food processing space, but you never see them in real life, being used in real life. Why is that? And we also realized restaurants are extremely messy. Food is extremely messy. Food is one of the most interesting physics problems because each food item is more or less non-heterogeneous, different shapes, sizes, humidity, etc. But it's very, very hard to handle. And we learned that the only way to make our food dispensing robot happen, for example, is to test it in the real world with real feedback cycles and change things every single day. So we iterate, we design hardware, we deploy it, we observe it, and that's why our stuff worked. Whereas I think what most other startups are doing, not wrong, but outdated, I would say, because this is a new trend, 3D printing, food safe 3D printing, completely new trend. And I think we are the only ones, if not the first ones, to use food safe 3D printed parts in production environments. In hardware, what happened in the last 5 years was, yes, you can iterate hardware, but you might go to Germany, buy this stainless steel card, you will wait 3 months. And what other startups tend to do, or big corporates, is instead of developing something on their own, they go out and buy 10 things off the shelf, they glue them together, and I call it, instead of finding a real solution to your problem, you're finding a compromise of 10 different moving parts. It might work, but it has never proven to have real ROI yet.
Fascinating. Okay, so in that case, we'll flip this, right? You said there are meaningful innovations that are happening in F&B. And I'm wondering, what is your favorite story of innovation? And it can be historical as well. It can be the invention of the franchise, but maybe not that. What is your favorite story of innovation in the kind of restaurant and food beverage business that you kind of think is like inspiring and an example of, what you kind of aspire towards in some respect?
Yes. So the key innovation I really respect, and I've dived so deep into it with McDonald's. McDonald's is not fancy at all, but they reinvent the entire process, literally from the moment you order, the entire customer journey to having the burgers ready, having an assembly line set up, having specialized systems. They invented the sauce dispensing guns where the sauce is becoming very consistent. That's a huge inspiration. And not just that, they built incredibly good product, but early on they realized the power of franchising and how to execute that. And not just franchising, but franchising with, real estate as a core part of it. So very, very impressive story. And that's a huge inspiration.
I completely agree. I highly recommend for anyone who's listening to this to watch the Ray Kroc movie, which I think I just found kind of like, exemplified the drive and tenacity kind of required to sometimes just back yourself, even when it's difficult. But second is read a bit about the economics of it. I think like franchising is, as you mentioned, arguably there's better economics than software very often. And also it's a bit more win-win. We were discussing over text the slow ventures thesis around franchising. Do you have any thoughts on the future of franchising before we kind of like move to the next segment?
Absolutely. I think franchising as a distribution model has not changed much. The product hasn't changed that much of what they're trying to distribute. In a nutshell, what has happened so far is the biggest value driver happens to be the brand, the demand. You're not selling just the supply and the processes. What people are interested in is a demand pull. Crumble cookies, McDonald's, Subway. Immediately, you don't need to take care about marketing, building your own brands. I think what has been changing recently, and we see this especially with dark kitchen type of concepts, is that demand pull does not need to be built from scratch. Meaning, I believe in the very near future with franchises, what will happen is just like Mr. Beast Burger took off from 0 to 100 immediately, that brand element will become increasingly smaller because that will become increasingly easier to build and almost commoditized of some sort. So the core value of the core modes of building a franchise product will be the entire ops and tech stack. And that's where we sit. But just like McDonald's, I would argue still the most consistent kitchen in the world because they built something so radically different that nobody else could have replicated. Not just the tech, not just the process, but the training, the culture, all of that. That will be the core product in the very near future.
So you mentioned one of your colleagues, one of the family members was involved with Subway. Is that correct?
Yes, correct.
Yes. So one of my favorite random PDFs I found on the internet was the operating manual for Subway, which is 800 plus pages.
Yeah.
And I think that speaks to the kind of IP that one has to develop. And I think the fact that you guys are doing it in such a data-driven kind of manner is something which really is a joy to witness. I think that is a good transition, I guess, to a section that I'd like to kind of dig into, which is, I guess, understanding a bit more about your theory, less on the market and the product side, but actually on what it takes to be a founder that can take a hard swing at these hard markets, right? And so I think I'll ask you a fairly basic question to start with, which is, what is the job of a great founder?
Great question. I think my interpretation of a great founder is someone who knows their own limits, who knows what they're not good at, but is also extremely good at finding resources, whether it's people or advice or team members, to compensate for that and just figure a way of solving something. That's, I think, the key quality of any good founder. People who just don't stop because they don't know anything, but will just drive through all the walls to figure out what it takes to get there.
Love that very much. And how do you conceptualize the difference between a top 0.001% founder and a top 1% founder? I think I've spoken to a few investors more who have an international view, right? And they look at the startup ecosystem in the UK and they say it's the difference in, for example, San Francisco between the 1% and the top 0.01% is like so significant. Like you just want to pile into that top 0.01%. And I guess the question here I'm asking is, how does one really elevate and like become someone who can create those outsized? What you shared is, I think, like the kind of fundamentals. Do you have any thoughts on taking that even further, if that makes sense?
Yes, I think how I discern the top 0.01 founder versus top 1% founders, I strongly believe to become top 0.01%, you have to just be full focus on whatever you do. No distractions, just build. Such a strong demand pull reputation, if you will. And then suddenly everybody is, convinced by you and everybody wants to work with you. I strongly believe the consensus top 1% founders will not become the top 0.01. But the most famous recent example I would say is Sam Altman. Until he launched ChatGPT, he was just building. He was just heads down, making his vision reality, and then the product speaks for itself. Whatever the result you're aiming for, that should speak for itself. And I think that's what makes an incredible founder and sets him apart from, a good, objectively good founder.
Awesome. Okay, so I think then two more questions on this front, right? So one is, I look at the list of things that you've done previously, and I want to kind of tap into how that's shaped your model for tactically how you go about company building, right? So we kind of touched upon the list before, but I'll kind of go over some of those other bits again, right? So it's previously peeling potatoes at my parents' restaurant since age 6, created one of the world's first Bitcoin faucets at age 13 with over 150,000 users, into number one at Bitpanda, Austria's first unicorn, founded a last mile delivery startup at age 17. I promise I'm not being a sycophant here. I'm just reading from your biography, by the way. This is like... Built software for the Austrian military at age 18, helped create a drink called G-Spot for the Netflix show Sex Education. The Series A was led by Heineken, did food PE, other white-collar stuff, projects, etc. What I'd like to kind of tap into here is, as you've built out the roadmap for Kaikaku, right? As you think about kind of stuff ranging from what you do on a daily basis, the planning cycles, the roadmap to kind of solve these hard problems, etc. What is it from those previous experiences that's like shaped how you go about things today in terms of how you've changed your approach, but then also in terms of what you've stuck with, as you mentioned, that relentlessness and that kind of persistence? It's just like, that's a mindset thing. That's a kind of daily showing up thing. But in terms of lessons, in terms of how to operate better, is there anything that you can kind of share on that front? I know it may be a bit nebulous, but I'm curious.
Yes, I've two strong views on this, and I split it into two parts, because I would say I've done something that's actually frontier, things like Bitcoin faucets back in 2014. This is one of the world's first. Nobody knew how that business model worked. I don't know how I got into that. I just Googled how to make money online. And truthfully, the reason I did all those businesses was I just wanted to hustle my way out of restaurants. I want to escape this industry. So for frontier type of projects, I strongly believe the only thing you need to be comfortable with and you should be actually good with is change is the only constant. You will not know what the hell is going on, but you need to just figure a way out. You just need to be comfortable with change. Everything will change from one day to another. On the Bitcoin example, AdSense, Google AdSense, which was the main revenue driver where they put ads on your website, they just banned the account because suddenly crypto was, not accepted anymore for ads. So, find a new way of another ad network, blah, 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 blah. And I think that's required. Back to my previous thing of rapid iteration. I think that's the only way to figure out frontier markets, to not overthink it, to not sit there and think too much. There's no roadmap building frontier things. You just need to iterate and figure things out. On the other hand, I think because I helped build, last mile delivery software, build things for the military, and also this consumer drinks brand, they have playbooks already that are proven. And I would call them not frontier businesses, because other people have already figured out a way out of how to make them a success. And unless you're extremely confident you have an unfair edge in that industry, I think the best thing to do is just study other people's playbooks. So my approach right now is a lot of things have been proven. Franchising is a proven concept. That's why we've onboarded our advisor, Don. Food technology is a proven technology. That's why we onboarded the Chief Scientist of Mars. Those things we don't need to reinvent with. We just need enough wisdom and knowledge. But the things that nobody else has done, just build a freaking entire new restaurant franchising stack. It goes crazy. Just complete chaos. Just build. Most things fail. Some things go right. And that's the learning.
Deeply appreciate that. I think maybe one other question I'll ask on the kind of history there is, favorite book of many of my friends is Ben Horowitz's The Hard Thing About Hard Things. And within it talks about the fact that really, as you mentioned, that relentlessness sounds nice, but oftentimes when you're kind of staring down the barrel of like really tough decisions, or just times when the first 5 things you try don't work, and the 6th thing hopefully is turning over the stone and that will work. It's difficult, right? And so I'm wondering, in terms of the hardest challenges you faced entrepreneurially in terms of company building, projects, etc., can you share one particular kind of story on that front of kind of, trial and error, or specifically kind of like failure in a difficult context that you kind of bounce back from and found another way through, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I think for me personally, there are lots of hard business type, commercial challenges. The hardest things that you will ever experience is if something goes wrong within a very tightly knit team. Whether it's culture clashes, whether it's conflict, etc. It's like the human emotions. I think that is extremely hard to process and hard to navigate. And as a recent example, and this is happening actually next week, is our CTO, who is now 6 years old, incredibly smart person who has built Ocado Technologies robotic grocery warehouses, just realizing once we moved into this restaurant, we iterate so fast. And because he's not used to it, he's also used to big resources. He's done incredible stuff with Ocado. The skill sets then at the end don't match anymore. If we iterate very scrappily every single day, and all the team is on site doing lots of things, whereas the CTO, because his CV is incredible, he gets invited to talks all the time and whatnot. So the hardest situations are, I strongly believe, is right now, for example, he is transitioning to becoming a part-time technical advisor instead of being a full-time CTO. Just going through the entire process, explaining to other people, especially people who genuinely care about you, work with for a very long time, and making decisions on what is best for the company. What is best for the company versus what is best for what you would love in your own personal viewpoint. That is very, very hard.
I really appreciate the transparency on that front. You're totally right. I think the human element is obviously this underrated element in terms of difficulty, right? In terms of, as you mentioned, alignment, right folks, right time. Everyone has their own interests and such. It can be incredibly chaotic, and the job here is to kind of herd cats sometimes. But I appreciate that. So one more question on this front is, particularly on the kind of founder theory front, is I'd love it if you could walk us through how you approach storytelling, narrative, and even PR as a founder. In particular, I would say it strikes me that for hard tech innovations, you don't just need the hard tech, you need the storytelling to mobilize capital, talent, and just general momentum to bring that vision to life. I was wondering if you could give us a peek into your kind of framework and approach on this and how those lessons may apply to other founders. I think you have a particular flourish when it comes to storytelling.
Thank you. So the honest truth is I don't have a real framework, but I do agree, especially with something that's frontier, where with most conversations, nobody will understand what the hell you're talking about. It is very important to have a very clear narrative, a clear story, and almost part of your job becomes to educate people around you of what you are trying to do. The hard truth of that is not many people will want to understand, not people will like to understand. They will just won't take the time for it. But also the ones who do understand, they will love it. So my approach is, I think, instead of me trying to tell a narrative and convince people who probably won't be convinced in the first place about something, my storytelling is more or less just targeted toward people and the audience I want to work with. So I'm not trying to convince everyone and all the LinkedIn posts and my Twitter posts, etc. I'm trying to find the audience who I personally believe will like what we do, but also more importantly, who we would like to partner with and be in a community with.
I love that. And I think there's a really good piece by Lulu from Rostera, and she talks about Ramp's way of kind of doing, fundraising announcements and all that such stuff. And she talks about that relentless focus on like your core segment of people that you're trying to touch upon, and the fact that communication starts with a call, right? And I think I recommend that piece by anyone who's listening. But this very much echoes that. And so I think the next question that I'll kind of ask as we zoom out from, Joseph, founder, is Joseph, who's someone building something in the UK, right? Which is, I would love it if you could explain, I know you wrote this letter recently, if you could explain your thesis on why the UK can be a hardware superpower, what the talent arbitrage play there is, and that kind of broader idea set that you put forward.
Absolutely. So to be frankly honest, I'm not a hardware engineer myself, and I only got into this as a very naive founder within hardware. But I realized the trend, which is if you look across the entirety of the UK, not even UK, the entirety of Europe, is there are so many smart hardware engineers. People who build stuff from the age of 6 or 7. We have employees who build tractors from the age of 9. Other students who've won car competitions and all sorts of crazy stuff. But then they get into a good university, they keep up the pace, they learn a lot, and from that point onwards, most people just lose that pace. What do I mean by that? There are two, I guess, brain drain parts. Number one, the harsh truth is if you're genuinely passionate about engineering and you don't care about the money, you will go choose a very good firm around the UK, very famous ones. You will earn very little money. You will, stay outside of London and start living a very slow life. Now, what the problem there is, you will start optimizing one screw, one part for the next decade. You just get used to it. And they will get very good at that. But the talent is lost. The prototyping, the thing that did at the kid, completely lost. And also the other bigger part, I think, is just finance consulting. Unfortunately, within the UK, unlike the US, is if you're a very ambitious person, ambitious but not very opinionated about what you do, you just want to work with lots of ambitious people, finance, consulting, all these prestigious jobs draw a lot of talent. It's not a bad thing, but I just think it is a massive talent arbitrage because their skill sets, if you build microwaves as a kid, is not to, shift things around an Excel sheet, but to build more things like that. And we have so many people in the UK who could do that.
Okay, I love that very much. And then I guess the next question is, if you've actually made some angel investments yourself, do you have a request for startups or a list of ideas that you think, hey, look, someone's ambitious, someone wants to take a punt, are willing to, as you mentioned, run through the walls of problem solving, right? And maybe they don't have a hardware background, but they want to take advantage of this. What are some interesting companies you think that could be built in general, perhaps in F&B or even in the UK? But what are some things you're like, oh, this should exist in the world, but I'm obviously focused on my company, but I'd love if someone else built this?
That's a great question. Honestly, I've never thought about that. I'm just laser focused on this. I don't have many ideas that I would say, okay, this is great. But I meet a lot of founders where their profile just sets them up perfectly for a certain thing. Somebody who, like me, I grew up in a restaurant. I lived and breathed restaurants. And lots of founders who might grow up on a farm. They live and breathe agriculture, and they build robots as a kid. And I would say to them, hey, you should probably do the thing where you have the most unfair advantage in. And this is a phrase from our first investor who also told me that, Joseph, I know you're cool, you do lots of things, but why don't you just stop all of that and do that one thing where you have the most unfair advantage in the entire world? I'm more of a believer in talent than
Okay, I appreciate that. So I guess two questions on talent then is, was that first investor Junaid, by the way?
Yes, Junaid Hussain from
Awesome. Could you share the story or kind of a bit of background on Junaid so listeners kind of know about his investment backs? I think he's a good example of those kind of early hard tech ambitious backers of kind of companies in the UK. Just very briefly. And then second question after that is, what is the best hire that you've ever made? Talking of talent, right? What are the kind of descriptive, we can't pick favorites, I guess, but like if you could describe one hire that shows, I guess, not just what a great founder looks like, but then also what a great kind of team member looks like in that early stage kind of company.
Yeah. So the way I met Junaid was I had a very good Austrian friend in London who interned for this fund. A bit of background from Junaid and Hobbyco is they're a spin out from a larger frontier market, emerging market private equity hedge funds. And Junaid got the mandate to build a holding company that invests in extremely frontier, crazy ideas. And yeah, we sat down for a coffee in half an hour and yeah, we clicked. And I think not too long after we had a term sheet, we quit everything and went all into this. And actually, Junaid was very instrumental in hiring, and not just hiring employees, but the advisors, investors, just getting people excited. And he taught me a lot on how to tell a narrative, how to convince other people, the energy levels, and then what I need to believe in myself before I go out, all sorts of small stuff like that. A very recent hire that I would love to talk about that we've made is, I thought initially, and this is, I think, the consensus view, you hire someone from a good university who's objectively good at something, and those will be the best employees. I personally believe that is sort of true, but there's not 100% correlation. So we made one hire who we call him the manufacturing wizard. He's from Hungary. He came to the UK. He had I think, bachelor's in electrical engineering. All he wanted to do was do engineering, but he landed in the UK and he had to work at a pub and also hospitality. And then he worked at a small, I think, audio equipment store and whatnot, trying to find his dream job, which is something now that he has 10 years, I think, in hospitality and all these other things, something in the intersection of prototyping, technology, and foods. And we found him on a non-conventional job platform. I think one platform where you would Indeed or Job Today where you hire hospitality workers, and then his profile popped up. I'm like, wow, what is this? And I knew he was a perfect hire because when we asked him, he literally cried when he got the job. And he came here, he looked at everything, and this is literally someone's dream job. And they will excel. He comes here, I think, every weekend to do those are the hidden gems, and those are the best hires you will ever make.
I absolutely love that. One of my favorite anecdotes is from, I think perhaps a mutual friend of ours, a guy called Sharik Hashmi, who is building a company called Prosper, also in the robotics sector. And he spoke about the underrated arbitrage of hiring folks, in his case, when it came to robotics stuff, who had kind of excelled at set types of like online gaming. And in particular, he was talking about people designing the telerobotics infrastructure. He was like, this is like ideal, almost isomorphic kind of skill set, but you're not going to find these people on LinkedIn, right? You have to go on the Discord servers and kind of find. I think that's, we were talking about talent arbitrage before. That's an underrated kind of example of that. I appreciate that very much. I will leave with a couple of final questions. So the first one is, I spent the last month in San Francisco, and one of the things I really enjoyed about that experience, it was my first time there, was the absolutely in-your-face nature of serendipity and giving back. And this idea that, oh, like you're working on something cool, like how can I help, right? I would like to ask you if there are any requests that you have for prospective listeners as it relates to, here's some challenges, here's some open questions, here's some things to think about over the next year, that, hey, someone hears that, they have a connection, they have some sort of information or something, it could be helpful to you. Are there any things that kind of fit that kind of bucket in terms of, like, here's what we're working on the next year? If anyone has any thoughts on any type of talent, would love to hear from you.
Yes, I want to maximize to meet the maximum amount of people who are non-consensus and who are able to wrap their head around something different. And that, I think, has been a huge distraction and a huge hurdle, because the truth with the venture market, even though all the people say, oh, they're non-consensus, blah, 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 I would say 90% of them just chase, I call them sheep people, and chase the hottest things, and they learn about Gen AI because it's hot, blah, blah, blah. But there's a very small group of people in the world, I strongly believe, who genuinely think differently, who are able to filter all the noise and just focus on creating, their own thesis, their own way of thinking about the world. This is not just investors, this is founders, builders, operators, even students. I think I would just love to meet more people like that, because they're very rare.
I completely agree. And I think as I reflect on my own kind of, journey, which we're all kind of still on, I feel like this is very much a skill that one can cultivate. I think that there's a time when I think I was a bit more focused on what's zany and weird, and I've kind of like maybe overly focused in the last couple of years on things that felt a bit more, or in the last few months at least, on like things that are a bit more kind of consensus and pragmatic. I think there's obviously a synthesis one kind of wants. But if anyone here wants to become that type of person, so they feel like, actually, I want to be someone who's thesis driven, I want to be someone who can look at a raw space and not just do what's at the surface level, but really dig deeper, I feel like I have some ideas about how collaboratively that can be done. So if someone wants to become the type of person that Joseph wants to meet, get in touch with me, actually, because we can kind of riff on theses together. I appreciate that very much. Final question is, what are you most excited about over the next, over 2025 as it relates to life and company building?
Yes, so I'm extremely excited about the fact that I think we've now hit an inflection point, a very early one, where for us, we've proven our super scrappy prototype works, so that the product shows early signs of success. And we've just signed, or in the process of signing, probably the best, largest enterprise distribution for what we're building. There are like 50,000 client sites around the world. And if we can crack that, our distribution and our credibility will shoot up, and the sky's the limit. Now, why I'm so excited about that is, initially we thought franchising or restaurant is winner takes all type of market. People only want to talk to you if you can prove you're successful. We thought we had to open more of our own prototypes to show, hey, we can do it. But it has been, brought forward now. And the reason why I'm so excited as well is, normally working with big enterprises, they like to do internal trials, and it's going to take a few years to get through. We just skip all of that. We're going to trial straight at one of the real clients with, I think, 20,000 people on site, put our entire technology there, and prove to a large enterprise operator that it can be done, and prove to them our real ROI. So if that works out, I think things will catch fire. And I'm very excited about what's next.
Well, I'm looking forward to keeping up with the journey, and hopefully you can speak, as that kind of goes on. But yeah, thank you so much, Joseph. It's been wonderful.
Thanks, Trish. My pleasure.